What's up, everybody? Last time we talked about the top 10 ramp and churn options from this past meta that we've been in. Now we're going to take a look at the top 10 basic action cards and see how this went. Let's jump into it.
What's up again, everybody? Let's talk about the top 10 basic actions that I think will see play going into the new meta. These are ranked, as I said, by likelihood of seeing play in the competitive scene after rotation occurs next month. Let's begin. At number 10, we have Misdirection. I originally had Nefarious Broadcast in this spot, but I dropped it from the list in place of Misdirection as I value the effect of Misdirection and the history of its effectiveness a bit more than Nefarious Broadcast. I expect Misdirection to see some play as an early turn tool for further guaranteeing that an important character is going to hit the field early. The utility of this card means that it could go onto multiple different teams, and as long as you're not looking to trigger a bunch of when fielded effects, this works well for getting expensive or powerful characters into the field for cheap.
I saw that card being used a little bit in casual semi-competitive play. I kind of expected it to make its way onto some competitive teams, but that's not the meta that we were given or that we found ourselves in, because we found ourselves in a burn heavy or a very simple combo heavy meta. And there are other cards that do that go on the team. So if you're looking at dragons, then Ring of Winter already does this. And then you're not ever using this for a 2-drop win condition because you don't need to, right? You just buy a 2-drop and you're good to go. No need to buy a 2-drop Misdirection. If we were looking at pieces like Dark Side or other big 7-6-drop win conditions, you would consider this for Fix It, but then you just wouldn't end up using it because Fix It, you need the other spots for basic actions that win you the game. So this just doesn't end up fitting in the meta, and it being at 10 or falling off the list is just fine. Side note on Nefarious Broadcast, same thing. It just doesn't end up being necessary in the current meta.
At number 9, we have Team Up. I expect to see a few Team Up teams get experimented with, as the damage output is just pretty impossible to deal with. The flexibility that Team Up provides with team building is nothing to scoff at, as you could conceivably build aggro and control Team Up teams. This can also make the cut as a secondary win condition on action-based teams as well, and we've already seen that take place in the 2-team takedown tournament that is concluding next week. It's funny, I keep hyping up Team Up and not actually providing anyone with a team list of a Team Up team, so I will get to work on a control and aggro version of a Team Up team. I'll throw them at you and you can tell me what you think.
All right, so Team Up. Team Up is one that is hard to gauge right now because it looks like it's about to get a ton of love with all of the affiliations that are releasing. But if we look at it, how it performed or, lack of performance in this past meta, it was played and popular in casual formats, but it wasn't played anything semi-competitive or competitively. I think that will change going forward, and I have a list and a team that I want to play on camera in the next few days. So I'm going to try to do that and show you guys what I've found. Because now that you have these double affiliated characters that do stuff, Team Up is a lot more active and can be active early. So we'll see how it goes going forward, but Team Up being 9 is not a bad spot. It could move up a couple of spots based on the other things that are on this list. Let's take a look at the next one.
At number 8, we have Villainous Pact. Villainous Pact is a pretty good fit on villain teams as a secondary win condition, as well as a conditional form of ramp. The fact that it plays both roles well means it should see some play on villain control and villain aggro teams. This pairs rather well with the Owlman villain variant that's out there, as you already have hugely buffed attackers with Owlman, and unless your opponent is stocked up on villains as well, then you should be able to connect with lethal after rolling Villainous Pact and getting Owlman out.
Alright, so Villainous Pact was actually found on a lot of those villain teams, those aggro variant teams in particular, but I think I even put it on my villain control team when I was playing on the online tournaments that were run by Chris and Rob's Game Room. Shout out to Chris and Rob's Game Room. This card fits on those teams, but didn't really make it into the competitive meta because it wasn't necessary. It does the same thing but a little bit worse than Resurrection, and definitely a lot worse than Create Food and Water. So it made some sense on those semi-competitive lists, and it being 8 makes sense, but anything higher than that is a little bit pushing it.
At number 7, we have Splinters Teachings. The global on Splinters Teachings is a flexible aggro and control piece. It can act as a soft counter to both Mr. Fix-It and Dragon teams, and can be used effectively on aggro teams when you need to push some extra damage with something like an unblockable sidekick. I see it being played on both control and aggro teams, either as a tech against those matchups or as a tool to push at the end on aggro teams.
Yeah, Splinters Teachings did see play for that exact reason. It saw some play on some competitive teams for that pay swap and prevent this damage from going through, or on those little sidekick teams where you'd pay the shield swap the attack of one of your random sidekicks that's unblockable with a big thing in the field. It saw a lot of play for that reason. It might be a little higher on this list just because it did see that play there, but 7 is not a bad spot. I could see that as well.
At number 6, we have Improvised Weapon. This is nearly a guaranteed spot on Boom Boom Yanti and Attune teams. Combining this with the common Yanti that becomes unblockable when an action is played means bad things for your opponent. This is also good on triple Attune super rare Yanti teams as a way of pushing Attune damage off of the purchase and use of the action. The only thing keeping this card from climbing higher on the list is the possibility that it does get cut for Investigation on Boom Boom Yanti teams, because Investigation on those teams is pretty sick. Time will tell, but right now it earns the 6th spot on.
All right, it should be a little higher. It should be a good bit higher because it did see a ton of play for a little bit on the Yanti teams because this was a one-cost action that you could pick up and purchase. This one would sometimes get subbed out for momentum, but because it made a slot on that team pretty easily and pretty consistently, it should be much higher on the list, and we'll continue to see where we put that at the end.
At number 5, we have Insect Plague. This card earns the 5 spot because it very nearly single-handedly makes sidekick teams strong. Making a sidekick or ally unblockable and then buffing them like crazy is a legitimate strategy, and there are enough strong pieces around the sidekick strategy that I see this one being commonplace. This is an auto pick on any Jubilee sidekick aggro team, and I expect those teams to see more and more play going forward, which, as a side note, will increase the inclusion of things like Kate Bishop Hawkingbird in the meta, as you can't block something that's unblockable. Pro tip.
Pro tip. Yeah, so sidekick teams didn't cut their way into the top meta just because they weren't fast enough in comparison to Yanti, Pureblood, and because there were board clears that existed and awkward things that existed. Even like Hulk made it awkward to have sidekick teams because if you just pushed with all of your little guys, then they just block with all of their stuff and then you die. And so this didn't cut into the meta like it probably should have, or like it could have, excuse me. It is an auto include in sidekick teams like that, but it is very slow. 1 a turn unblockable is slow, even though you can buff them up a little bit. There's not enough buffing mechanics as well to make that 1 unblockable a turn super effective as well. So this one should be lower on the list, shouldn't be so high.
Next up, we have Upgrade Proton Cannon in the 4 spot. This is a guaranteed add-on on Fix-It teams and feels at home on Dragon teams as well. It is the first win con on a Fix-It team, with Hellfire Club being the second, and it acts in the same way on Dragon teams. Both of those teams are performing well, with Fix-It being tier 1 and Dragons being borderline tier 1 and tier 2 based on the performance of those teams. Expect to see this card a lot. Overcrush is good. Thanks D&D first set, and by that I of course mean thanks Blade Knight, and by that I of course mean thanks Throne Car and Dr. Octopus from the AVX set. Man, Overcrush has been around for a long time.
Yeah,
Top 3, here we
All right, so 4, let's jump all the way back. All right, Upgrade Proton Cannon did make its way onto Fix-It teams. It wasn't necessary on Dragon teams because Dragons had Breath Weapon, and usually that meant your Dragon was getting through unblocked anyway. But yeah, this should be in the top 3 because of the effect that it had on Fix-It teams and the power level of Fix-It teams. It's showing really, really well at Worlds and being present at Nationals, like all over the place. This card is really good, and it should be higher than number 4.
Top 3, here we go. Next we have Magic Missile, and we'll throw on Powerbolt as well, but for 2 different reasons. Magic Missile has a guaranteed spot on Fix-It teams, and Powerbolt definitely has a guaranteed spot on Boom Boom teams. It's really kind of interesting because Magic Missile has to go on to your Fix-It team, and Boom Boom has to have Powerbolt alongside of it, but when you switch them, when you put Magic Missile on Boom Boom teams, and obviously when you put Powerbolt on Fix-It teams, neither really work very well. But on their individual teams, they are so incredibly powerful that if you didn't have them, you were wasting your time. If you see those teams in competitive play, I would expect to see Powerbolt, and I would expect to see Magic Missile on them.
Yeah, so let's talk about Magic Missile specifically. Magic Missile is a handcuff onto Fix-It teams. You need it. If you don't have it, then you're not actually winning the game because you're running the common Fix-It, and you need to ping it somehow. So that one deserves the 3 spot. Power Bolt, on the other hand, you can now cut Power Bolt off of a Boom Boom Yanti team and instead run the 2-cost Thrown Brick because that card is really good. It's 2 cost and it does the ramp job for you alongside of it. But you could still include Power Bolt. Those teams aren't as prevalent just because there's a better bird team out there and it's called Yanzi Pureblood. So you just take Power Bolt and move it back in the list, but it makes some sense being there. And it does some damage. So you could leave this on the list on the top 10 and be okay. But I would separate them. Most definitely.
All right, the final 2 I actually switched around in my mind multiple times. I had one in the second spot, and then I switched it to the first spot, and then I switched it back to the second spot and back to the first spot. So really consider these 2 to be pretty interchangeable because they are both so wonderfully powerful. At number 2, we have Investigation. This card is good on just about every team. It's cheap enough to purchase and use in early turns. It doesn't lose value over time. It can be comboed to insane levels with the spot. It's just super solid. One thing I have not mentioned up until this point is that most of these actions get countered by the presence of an active Scarlet Witch, and I could see how some people would clearly value this less than global-based ramp because of that fact, but keep in mind that globals can also be countered by the Rare Wrecker. This card is flexible, awesome.
Rare Wrecker hasn't seen play.
And I see it being a staple on a lot of teams, even with Scarlet Witch being out there stopping all of the burn damage floating around from Boom Boom and Yanti. And
all right, so for Investigation as number 2, I can justify this. I'm not sure if I want to. I go back and forth in my mind now that I'm thinking about it. Like, it sees a ton of play casually and semi-competitively. And for those reasons, you could legit put it number 2 because it's good and because it's played a ton in casual and semi-competitive scenes. If we're talking only the highest tier competition, then, Investigation doesn't see any play whatsoever, shouldn't even be on the list, like that sort of thing. But to talk only about that highest level meta stuff and then forget about all of the casual semi-competitive play that makes this game great would be a bit of an oversight. So putting it on the list is necessary. Now, where you put it, it varies based on how you value casual semi-competitive play to super competitive play. If you only like the super competitive stuff, then this would be pretty low on the list. If you play casually or semi-competitively, play a lot of spot ramp, then this is really high on your list. So we'll probably put it somewhere in the middle and just kind of guess.
And at number 1, you may have guessed it already, I put Resurrection because Resurrection is awesome. Resurrection has unconditional ramp built into a global, and it gives you bag control if you're really good with it. It can go on any team, and it's good on every team. It should see a ton of play, and if you plan to play even a bit competitively, then I would learn how to manage your bag using only Resurrection. I'd also recommend learning how to play your games with double Resurrection in play, both you and your opponent having it, because the player with the better handle and understanding of how their bag works when you resurrect once or twice will have a huge advantage. I mean, it's possible with just Resurrection and no other forms of ramp to win games, and it's singularly because it allows you to ramp 1 die and also control your bag, control the cycles of your bag. It's really strong, and it's for those reasons why I have put it number 1 on this list.
Yeah, namely, it's played on a ton of competitive teams. It's played on a ton of semi-competitive teams. It's played on a ton of casual teams. This card's all around good. Off this list, we should have put on Create Food and Water because it saw a ton of play super competitively. Maybe not so much semi-competitively or casually because I don't think people, like I did, thought too much of it. When there's a Resurrection Global that preps you a die, what's the point of putting a die back in the bag or putting it in used? But churn is a powerful thing, especially when you can do it on your opponent's turn. So that is an oversight. We should have included that on this list. And it should be towards the top because churn is in a lot of ways just as good as ramp. If you want to roll 5 dice, that's great. And who doesn't want to roll 5 dice? But 4 dice being the exact 4 that you need is also very, very good. So we should consider putting that one on the list. But that is the top 10 list. Now let's reorder it a little bit. All right, so if I had to reorder this list, I would start with Resurrection still at number 1, and then right below it, I'd put Create Food and Water. And those two, you could argue, are interchangeable because they do very similar things. One gives you ramp, one gives you a little bit better churn because you can use it on both turns. But they're both bag fixers and bag managers, so they're both really high, and they both saw a ton of play. Number 3, I'd put as Investigation, still because it sees so much play in semi-competitive and casual play, and I think that merits value into our decision making, and the fact that it sees a ton of play in both of those formats means that it deserves a high spot. Now in the 4th spot, I'd put Improvised Weapon, and this is where things get a little different from our current list. Improvised Weapon I'm putting there because it saw so much play in the early nationals and WKOs for the Yanti teams, and because of that, and because it's the best team in the meta, you know, it should be high up on there, and it did see a ton of play there, even though some people started cutting it towards the end and just using the in-team actions that were one cost. It still saw some play. Upgrade Proton Cannon, handcuffed with Magic Missile, basically for those fix-it teams, is at number 5. You could separate these because some people did run Magic Missile as sort of a Yanti deterrent. You just ping off Yanti. But you could also handcuff them together, and that's what I'm going to choose to do at number 5. At number 6, I'm going to put Splinters Teachings because it did see some play on a variety of different teams. Even semi-competitively, it saw some play early on in this meta because it is so good at flipping attack stats and pushing in some, you know, lethal damage. It's a hard thing to play with if you've never played with it before as well, and hard to play against if you've never played against it before. At number 7, I'm putting Team Up because I think Team Up is a little bit higher than the 9 spot that it was in, and it is only going to get better. Number 8 is Villainous Pact for me. It's just okay, and it doesn't really see play anymore. Number 9 is Insect Plague, and it's just okay, and it doesn't really see play anymore. And number 10 is Powerbolt because it's right on that cusp of being okay on Boom Boom Yanti teams, which are pretty decent teams in general, but it could fall off of those lists, and if it falls off the list that it should be on, then it's not even worth putting on the list. So right at the 10 spot is good. And Misdirection doesn't see any play, and Nefarious Broadcast doesn't see any play, so those ones would fall off of the list. So that is my top 10 list. What is your top 10 list of this one? I find this one to be a lot more interesting. Basic action ranking is a lot more interesting because it usually is very team specific. So why don't you give me a top 10 list of basic actions, maybe based on your meta that you're playing in, or perhaps based on what you think the competitive meta has shown. But give me your top 10 list in the comment below. As always, thanks for watching.